Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Tonight we are diving into chapter 8, the book of Jubilees. So let's get started. Now, before we get into the reading, I do want to show you guys this. So if you are using the same PDF that we told you guys about, which is down in the description below, the people that put this PDF together, they did a lot of work. Now, this is their interpretation of what they believe the description that's being given here in regards to, because chapter 8 is going to be breaking down a lot of the map, right? Like the land that was divided up between Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that sort of thing. So it's a really cool chapter. It's going to give a lot of geographical information. Now, I'm just going to kind of scan through this just so you can kind of get a feel for what's there, but I'm not going to stop on each screen and really break down what's there. So you've got all kind of stuff to look at, and again, this is what they believe the separation of land is based off of what the text says. So again, there's just tons and tons of information. I'm going to scroll through this and then we'll get to the reading, but I strongly advise, if you have the ability to download this PDF, it is free, and take it under consideration. But of course, do your own study, do your due diligence, really dive into this, look into this. And if you have a different opinion, or if you have any thoughts on this, please let us know in the comments below. Or if you have any other resources that we can check out, we'd love to see what you have. In addition to the geographical stuff that's listed on here, there is also the breakdown of timelines of the various events that have happened so far that we've read, and things that we haven't read just yet. So if you'd like to use this as a resource, it can be a great resource. But again, we challenge everyone to do their own research, to do their own testing. I do thoroughly enjoy having this available. It shows the timelines of various things that have happened. And because of Jubilees being the book that it is, that gives us very specific timelines, Jubilees, and seasons that things come in, that's how they were able to do the math and put all this together. So this timeline will take us up to the year 2450, which they believe is the Exodus to Canaan.
Yeah, I think it's also good to note too, Kyle, that if they haven't or downloaded this yet, that all these dates do not come out of Jubilee specifically.
Correct. As a matter of fact, they tell you that in here as well, that these dates is a collection of different scriptures where this was all put together. But cool to look at nonetheless. So with that said, let's get started with chapter 8.
All right, chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. It says, In the 29th Jubilee, in the first week, in the beginning thereof, Arpachshad took to himself a wife, and her name was Razu-Ijah, the daughter of Susan, the daughter of Elam, and she bare him a son in the third year in this week, and he called his name Canaan. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it and sinned owing to it. For it contained the teachings of the watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and the moon and the stars and all the signs of heaven. And he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. And in the 13th Jubilee, in the second week in the first year thereof, he took himself a wife, and her name was Melchah, the daughter of Madai, the son of Japheth. And in the fourth year he begat a son, and called his name Shelah, for he said, Truly I have been sent.
Question, guys. Let me ask you guys this. Going back up to verse 2, at the very end of verse 2, it says, he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. So are we talking about him taking a city by force, or are we talking about him establishing a city? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking the fact that he uses the word seize could very well mean that maybe the fact that he is going to take it by storm or to take it by, power.
Yeah, I definitely see it from that way as well. Something that sounds more like by force or by military action or something like that, just because of the the language there. I could see it going either way, but I'm leaning toward more like he went to go find somewhere he can take. Well, let's look at the year. It says in the 29th Jubilee, so we'd have to go back and look at the
That's what I was thinking.
time frame / Jubilee of the flood, and then see how many years transpired between the two.
So going back to the timeline up here, if we look at the timeline, roughly 100 years have passed by here. So it very well could be that he went and seized a city by might, or very simply, there may have been a city left over that he took dominion over because a city was left there. So it could be either way. Either way, he seized the city, whether there was military force required or not, I guess.
Yeah.
But 100 years had passed by, and again, we're not told of every single child, of every single person that's ever been born. So it very well may have been other people there that it had to be taken from. Very possible.
And also, it doesn't mean that the city had to even be big.
Or even just a geographical location. This is where the city of used to be before it got flooded.
Right. The other thing I wanted to bring up was send owing to it. In verse 3, towards the end, it said when he read what was carved on the rock, and he read what was there, and he transcribed it. He wrote it down. In other words, he sinned owing to it, and of course, it gave the teachings of the Watchers and that sort of stuff. But what do you think that means? Sinned owing to it.
Well, yeah. As soon as I kind of read that and we went through it, we're thinking of this is post flood, and how would this information have passed on? It was supposedly wiping everything out, but where does it was said it was carved on the rock. So when you look at flood waters over time with erosion, yeah, you might lose some of the carvings or whatnot, but this was a 1 year real heavy, destroyed everything, but it didn't have a lot of time for erosion. So it's interesting that not only was this maintained in some form or fashion, but he took it upon himself to write it down. And it almost gives us that warning of, hey, when you don't know what it is or you don't understand what's going on, pray about it, go to the Father about it. And here it actually looks like it says it caused him to sin, or there was sin that was coming, that was a result of his action. Because owing means you owe back, or you did something that had a consequence to it. So it almost just sounds like the way that transpired for him was a negative total output.
Oh, for sure.
I've got another thing to add here, since we discussed whether the word meaning seize for himself. Because when it says when he goes into this city, it said that he found writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he read what was thereon, and so we're going to now where it says he transcribed it and sin owing to it. I wonder if this word seized is more or less he came upon a city that was before, and there really wasn't anybody there. You see what I'm saying? Because it says he comes across these teachings of the Watchers. And so if he's coming across these teachings of the Watchers, it doesn't say he showed up with an army, doesn't say he showed up with a whole bunch of people, or that there was even anybody in the city. It's almost like one of those movies you watch where everyone's, something happens, catastrophic event happens, and everyone's gone. And the person's like, well, I've got the whole city to myself. And so therefore, I think maybe that's leaning more towards now that he just found a city that was still standing after the flood, which is very much possible.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting there, what he wrote down and what the content was, it was about the omens of the sun, the moon, and the stars. So great and awesome things that God created, all the way back to the first 7 days of creation. These are the luminaries, the greater light, the lesser light, the stars. They're all used for time, for keeping seasons, all these positive and good things for us. But yet somehow they managed to pull something out of it that was bad or incorrect. So it just really shows you that whatever God creates for good, the other team, the other side can definitely use that exact same thing for evil. And it's just interesting to see that was the three things that it pulled out of that whole whatever was written there. Maybe that's all that was written, out of the total list of bad things, and that kind of opened that door back up. But I just thought it was interesting to see those three things there.
Yeah, and I pulled up some synonyms of owing. Other synonyms are unpaid, outstanding, owed, payable, due, overdue, unsettled, and mature. So it almost sounds to me like he took an oath. That's kind of what I'm getting.
Yeah, that's kind of like what was hitting me when we read it.
It almost sounds like he took an oath, because if he's owing to it, it's, this is what I'm receiving, and because of this that I'm receiving, I'll offer this in return, and that's what he owes. That's kind of what I'm getting. By all means, guys, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, because it doesn't really give specifics on this. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. At least not yet. It doesn't. Hey guys, if you are benefiting from this study and would like to continue future studies with us, be sure to subscribe and tag that notification bell.
Yeah, I was just looking up the word omen, and it says it's plural noun, omens. It says an event regarded as a portent of good or evil. So it could, something good or evil. So that says to observe the omens of the sun doesn't necessarily mean something bad. It could just mean that it could be also a good thing too, because the watchers would have known the cycles, just like what Enoch was shown. They would have known the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars. So it may not have been a bad thing overall, maybe, but the fact that the watcher's hands was in it was probably something you want to stay away from.
I think they were using it more for future telling.
Yeah.
Well, and especially with
instead
the
of a
whole,
timepiece.
yeah, especially with like the whole flood incident, they would have been trying to figure out the future. Here in a little bit, we're going to see them also looking ahead and saying, well, about some destruction that's coming before them, that's going to befall them. Well, how would they have known that? How would they have seen that coming?
Right.
And you can see that there's the duality in what happened here, because he wrote it down. It says he owed sin to it, but he wrote it down, and he was afraid to speak to Noah. So you immediately get, hey, who's kind of on the right side and who's kind of on the wrong side. It's like being a little child. You steal something, you take something, immediately you don't want to tell your parents. You're like, oh, I know if I tell them, they're righteous and I'm wrong. I don't want to account for what I just did, but I also know that you're the good guy, and now in the situation, I'm the bad guy. And so it also helps to leave us in that position of, yeah, we saw some stuff that happened with Noah, with him getting drunk after the flood and everything, but we also see that Noah still held to the highest standard here. If he's the reason that he doesn't want to say anything, because he knows what Noah would have something to say about it, Noah would have wisdom to interject, or he would admonish him for what he did.
Yeah. And I agree with that line of thought, guys, because I just went a little bit further down, and it says an omen is a phenomenon that is believed to foretell the future, often signifying the advent of change. It was commonly believed in ancient times and still believed by some today that omens bring divine messages from the gods.
Dun,
Yeah,
dun,
boy.
So there we go. Now we know.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on, I'd like to talk about verse 4 a little bit here. And it says, and he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. So what's, the scary part here is we're seeing that heart issue coming back through after the flood. We know that the Bible clearly says that men's thoughts were continuously upon evil before the flood came. And now that we're past the flood by a good little, not a lot, but by a good number of years now, we see Canaan coming across this city. He finds ancient writings of the Watchers having to deal with these omens of the sun, the moon, the stars, as foretelling the futures or whatever that is. And he knew in his heart it was wrong. And you see it in verse 4. He was afraid to tell Noah. He's like, I'm not telling Noah, because he's going to get mad. And for rightful reasons, because Noah had to go through a lot. He had to go through 120 years of building a boat and telling people to get your act together.
Yeah.
If you all these things that took place, and then to live through this and to get to this point, and all of a sudden for this to resurface. And we see the heart issue here again. This person knows it's wrong because they don't want to tell the person in authority what they found. And therefore, we see this whole thing coming back around after the flood.
Children, obey your parents.
That's right. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right.
Absolutely.
And will they promise that you will have long life on this earth?
There you go.
Because my daddy used to always tell me and my brothers, I brought you in, I'll take you out. All right.
I
Ready
think
for
our
verse 6?
parents. I think our parents meant that too when they said that.
Oh my dad grew up in rough country, so to speak, and he actually had a double barrel shotgun in the corner of the room in the back, and he'd point to us sometimes, going, "See over there?" He goes, "I brought you, and I'll take you out." I was like, "Yes, Daddy." Yes, Father.
Problem
We'll be
solved.
good from now on, Father.
Okay, starting back with verse 6. And in the 4th year he was born, and Shelah grew up and took to himself a wife, and her name was Muach, the daughter of Kesed, his father's brother, in the 31st Jubilee, in the 5th week, in the 1st year thereof. And she bare him a son in the 5th year thereof, and he called his name Eber. And he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nibrod, in the 32nd Jubilee, in the 7th week, in the 3rd year thereof. And in the 6th year thereof she bare him a son, and he called his name Peleg. For in the days when he was born, the children of Noah began to divide the earth amongst themselves. For this reason he called his name Peleg. And they divided it secretly amongst themselves, and told it to Noah. And it came to pass in the beginning of the 33rd Jubilee that they divided the earth into 3 parts, for Shem and Ham and Japheth, according to the inheritance of each, in the 1st year, in the 1st week, when one of us who had been sent was with them. Okay, well, as you guys can tell, I've already got a few things highlighted in here, but I want to hear what you guys had to say on this section first. What you got, guys?
Yeah, well, I love that we're already starting to get some, some major connections now back with canon and stories that we've been, told and have read throughout our lives, with Eber and the different lands and Shem, Japheth, and Ham getting their own, portion of land and whatnot. But also we get that name Peleg. And I know from all of my time reading Bible and having these small debates and trying to, speak to the authenticity of scripture and whatnot. Peleg is always one of those guys people go back to because he's a real life historical figure that people can go back to and really look at with documents that have already been validated and understood at a high level, where we see that interjected in scripture. Not that scripture came second, but we have history proving out scripture even more. And then we
Yep.
get words like Peleg, which we now have, come to understand throughout time and translation. That word literally means division or was divided. And so, there's going to be this cool story that comes up here soon that's going to, shed some light on it. But you'll see that just pop out just a little bit early here. It's almost like a precursor to what's coming.
So the only thing that I really had in this section here is verse 9. I had it highlighted. It says, "And they divided it secretly amongst themselves, and told it to Noah." So it sounds like Noah gave them this task. Hey, y'all go work it out amongst yourselves. Figure out
Mm-hmm.
what you like. I mean, that's kind of again, I'm making assumptions here, but y'all go figure it out. Come talk to me, and we'll go from there.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the other things that popped up was Eber, like I mentioned earlier, being that that's an ancient descendant of future Abraham. So we're kind of getting a little bit of, all right, things are starting to happen. We're starting to get into the land of where we understand and people characters that we've read tons about. But what's also interesting, sometimes Eber is spelled with an H at the front, so it'd be Heber or Heber, and
Hmm.
that's where that origin of the word Hebrew comes from. So we're getting now all the way back to the origin of all the stuff in Scripture, the people, the land, all the stories that happened, Moses, everything that we're kind of familiar with. We're kind of seeing the very, very first bright lights of those things popping up.
Awesome, great point.
All right, let's pick up in verse 11. And he called his sons, and they drew nigh to him, and they their children, and he divided the earth into the lots, which his 3 sons were to take in possession. And they reached forth their hands, and took their writing out of the bosom of Noah their father. And there came forth on the writing of as Shem's lot the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself, for his sons, for the generations of eternity. From the middle of the mountain range of the Rapha, from the mouth of the water from the river Tina, and his portion goeth towards the west through the midst of this river, and it extendeth till it reacheth the water of the abysses, out of which this river goeth forth, and poureth its waters into the seas of Miat. And this river floweth into the great sea, and all that is towards the north of Japheth, and all that is towards the south belongeth to Shem. And it extendeth till it reacheth Caroso. This is in the bosom of the tongue which looketh towards the south, and its portion extended along the great sea, and it extended in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue which looketh towards the south, for this sea is named the tongue of the Egyptian sea. In verse 15 it says, and it turneth from here towards the south, towards the mouth of the great sea, on the shore of it, its waters, and it extended to the west to Afra, and it extended till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon, and to the south of the waters of Gihon to the banks of this river.
Okay, so there is a lot of there's some names of some rivers and things like that that's being given here. If you do look at the maps and things like that that the people put together that's in this PDF, they're going to show you some things that are very, very different from what we think of when we hear the name the River Gihon and Euphrates, and when we hear these different names of rivers, we think of the modern day rivers that we know of to be those rivers, and well, they may not have always been called that. So we have to take into consideration what is being done here, and how would these lands be divided. We're talking about the entire earth being divided up into 3 lands, into 3 sections, right, for these children. And so these rivers that are dividing is probably not, just throwing this out there, is probably not the rivers that we think of when we're thinking of right there in the geographical location of the Middle East, specifically right around the landmass of Israel, the geographical location of Israel. So this is going to, if you're of the mindset that those rivers have always been called that, and those are the rivers that's mentioned in Scripture, this is going to challenge that quite a bit. So I would say, by all means, look into this a lot. There's some good information to pull from it. Not saying that what they put together is correct, but it's definitely something to check out. One of the first things I wanted to bring up, guys, in verse 12, it says, as Shem's lot, the middle of the earth. So are we talking about inside the ball?
Well, that would be impossible because it's not a ball.
Well, there you go. So there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who do actually think that there is an inner Earth and all this other kind of stuff. So
Yep.
there are some folks out there that think along those lines.
Hollow Earth.
Hollow Earth. Yep. We are not of that ilk. So we when we think of middle of the earth, we are thinking of the center of the circle of the earth, which that gives us some pretty good information to go on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the points that stood out to me was immediately it talks about the writings. So it says they came and they took the writings from Noah. So that means that Noah was doing way more than just some oral agreement, handshake type of deal. You know, he's like, hey, this is for you. This is almost a contractual agreement that you go here, you do this, this is for you. And that way, I think in like the future, we see that, you know, with Abraham buying the field with the double cave, and he's like, no, I don't want it for free. I'll buy it. And it's about ownership and the deed to the land. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's an early indication here. This is some of that first deeded out land of, hey, I'm going to write all this stuff down. I'm going to be very specific, and I'm going to let you know what's yours and what's not yours. And I think it's interesting that it goes on. It's about midway through verse 12. Verse 12 is super long, but midway through verse 12, it talks about extendeth till it reacheth the water of the abysses. So now that's kind of a new word. You know, we have oceans, we have seas, we have rivers, lakes, ponds, all this stuff, but now we're getting that kind of a new thought process. You know, maybe abyss is just mean really, really big ocean, but it's a new word that, you know, that we don't see anywhere else. So I thought that was interesting that it noted that way.
Mm-hmm. I think we're going to come into some things here in just a minute that's going to give us more information, more insight to what some of this is talking about, and I'll be sure to bring that up when we get to it. But I also had that highlighted here, and it extended till it reaches the waters of the abysses. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
There is a note there right to the left of where we're reading. If you're following along, it says, in the perspective of the writers of the Bible, the center of the earth is the North Pole. This is not Israel, and note the directions go next to Russia and then south. Thus, they do not begin in Israel, but in the north. So that's a little something to chew on right there.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can jump in, and I'm not one to argue the point either way. Just looking at the landing place of the ark and where we think it was, and where we've considered it to be in that Middle East region. How do you guys see them using that now as a new kind of landmarker, or a new, maybe they weren't even at that, they wouldn't have known what a North Pole is, or is it just a whole label thing, and our current label versus their label is just something totally different?
Well, I can tell you this. I can tell you from the people that put this together, they by no means believe that Noah's Ark landed where modern scholars believe it to have landed.
Mhm.
Um, they do not, by any stretch of the imagination, believe that.
Right.
And I'll say it like this: one of the telltale signs is for it to rest on the highest mountain. Any of the mountains in the Middle East don't even come remotely close to being the highest mountains. So maybe that's a little bit of a giveaway as to the direction this gentleman's going.
As always, be a Berean, do your own study, look into it for yourself, and
Yep.
So then what about like the findings that we've seen and different people that said they've found Noah's Ark or the Nephilim Ark, or all those different, stories as we, go in, because I'm sure you guys have all, while you're watching this, you've done the YouTube video, you've searched it. Where's Noah's Ark? Where did it land? What's going on here? How would you guys like kind of justify that then? Because it seems, I know for me, I've seen the video, I've watched the location of where they suspected to have landed. So it definitely seems like our world is either telling us a little fib, or that our understanding is not where it needs to be in some areas.
Well, there has been a lot of things that has been told to us that we have discovered to not be accurate. And that happens quite often, that we discover those things in this walk. Father opens our eyes to see things that the wise are blinded to. So whether it be intentional or unintentional, I think there's a lot of people with great intentions, God fearing, God loving people.
Ron, I was to say Ron Wyatt really feels like when he was alive that he had found where the Noah's Ark came to rest, and they believe it was actually further up the mountain anyway from where it is right now. That through a volcanic activity or something like that, there was eruption and actually pushed the ark further down where it is now. So, I mean, and again, Ron White, if you look into the history of him, he definitely wasn't somebody who was making any money off of any of his discoveries. This guy spent his own dime. He worked hard, go back to Israel, go wherever he felt like God led him. I will say that I definitely feel like he was a key person in finding where the Israelites crossed over. He was with the dive teams when they were going down there and finding the wheels of the chariots and everything else. So there was a lot of good things that came out of it. Now, whether or not that truly is the ark that Noah and his family was on, I've never come to the I've never was one to say, okay, that's absolutely where it is, and that's what that is. I think the discoveries, like you were talking about, Jonathan, were really cool. They found fecal matter from animals. They found fur. They found iron or some type of metal that was rivets that were holding the boat together, and they found petrified wood that would have dated. And I'm not always a big fan of carbon dating, just let me say that. But they said that the carbon dating they did would have put that, whatever that ship structure was, would have put it at the time, around that time. And the length, the width, and all that stuff just kind of added up with the dimensions that the Bible had. So who knows?
So
You know,
so actually, you brought up a good point, and this is the one of many, but one of the arguments as to the reason why the boat that was found, the structure that was found, the wooden structure that was found, uh, or discovered by Ron Wyatt, why it was not the Ark. Is the fact that it had it was they used iron nails and things like that, and that is not what was instructed for how the ark was to be built.
Mm.
There was no iron used whatsoever in the
Right.
ark that Noah built, at least not according to the instructions that we have that was given to us.
Am I
So,
remembering
so
that correctly though? Right? Didn't they find metal?
yes,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
you're
they
right.
Okay.
did.
Okay. I just want to make
So
sure.
now there are other people that will take that and say, okay, we'll see. This is the Nephilim ark,
Hmm.
and that's how we had giants on the earth in those days and afterwards. But I already am of the mindset in reading that in uh, previous chapters that that and after part doesn't mean after the flood, because it doesn't say after the flood. That's an assumption that's made by people.
Right.
Um, and also, if that were the case, if these Nephilim were to have survived, if this other race of people or whatever were to have survived, then that means that the entire purpose of the flood in the first place would have been a complete failure. And I just don't see the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of all gods, the great I am. I don't see him messing up like that. I just don't.
Um,
You know, oh, I destroyed the whole earth, but they slipped through my
Well,
fingers.
and if
I don't see that happening.
and I would say this, if I again, if my memory serves me correct, they were all dead before the flood anyway. That was part of the punishment of the Watchers, was to watch all their children die before them.
Ta-da!
So
Now, granted, now that was the men that where the angels mated with mankind, that sort of thing, right?
right,
However, remember they sinned against the animals and all that other stuff too. So there was all kind of abominations that were out there that still had to be cleansed.
right.
And just because someone was not a giant necessarily, didn't mean they didn't have something
Some
going
kind
on
of
with
genetic
their
anomaly going on.
correct,
Yeah,
correct.
good point.
Yeah.
So when the Father said he did the flood to cleanse the earth from all of that, I believe that his word is good enough. He said that's what he was doing
Yeah.
it for, and that's why he did it, and that's why it was done, and that's what was done. That's just my
Well,
belief.
and here's the thing too, and this is something we won't have time to go into this study with, but if earlier in this chapter we're reading about Canaan and that he went into a city and found the writings of the Watchers, so maybe some of this technology, some of this understanding is still out there. And this is where we kind of see this reoccurrence take place later, where all of a sudden, the Perizzites and the Canaanites and all these different tribes of people, they're all of a sudden of extraordinary size. You got 12 to 20, maybe 30 footers that are roaming the earth. Maybe there was something to this hidden knowledge that all of a sudden resurfaced through man going back and then doing things he wasn't supposed to do. Don't we
Maybe
get that
so.
with Nimrod? Where something we know that something happened with Nimrod, where Nimrod
That's
became
right.
a mighty man. So we
Right.
know that
Hmm.
there was some type of knowledge or something he got a hold of that enabled him to become this mighty man. So
Yeah.
who
That's
knows?
right. And you know what? It kind of leads me to believe that this writing that was made from that's transcript that was made from that writing on the rock may have had something to do with it.
Yep.
Of what Noah got a hold, or not Noah, of what Nimrod got a hold of.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And ladies and gentlemen, don't be a Nimrod.
Don't be a Nimrod.
Don't be a Nimrod.
Now, guys, if you can see down here on verse 16, you notice I've already got something highlighted here where the Garden of Eden is mentioned. So we've got some pretty cool stuff coming up in part two of chapter 8 in the book of Jubilees. We'll see you next time. God bless.
Shalom.
Ciao.
Yeah, and then Peleg later, he had a son, and his name was Pegleg.
Dun-dun.
Sorry, I thought we were going to do bad dad jokes. But anyway.